This is Rabbanit Sarna and Rabbi David Wolkenfeld. Shalom and welcome to the Straw Hat. We are the official podcast of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel Congregation, an Orthodox community in the beautiful Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. Today's episode is coming out on Erev Pesach, and we are just full of resources for this very strange year that we are having, and a very strange Pesach. So that's mostly what we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about some of the resources the shul has been providing. We will be talking about this idea that a lot of people are having their like Seder bar mitzvah this year. So we'll be talking about that a little bit. And we hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening.
So, hi, Rabbanit Sarna. Where are you right now?
I'm actually at shul. We're about to do all the packing for the Seder to go orders and everything. So it's a crazy day.
Very exciting. Very exciting. Okay. Well, it's nice to hear your voice. As we record this podcast, I'm sitting at my table in our apartment. So it's 4 weeks since we shut down the shul, but we're shut down the shul building, but we're still for tefillah and for classes. But the building is being used as a hub for the distribution of food, and especially Pesach food. And the shul has switched its operations to a lot of online offerings and phone calls and things of that sort. Pesach is starting just as we're recording this, just a few days, as this podcast is released, just a few hours. I thought it'd be wise and helpful just to go through and just talk about some of the resources the shul is sharing, so that people who are in the shul can learn about them, and those who are not in the shul who listen to this podcast can hear a little bit about how our community is recommending that people approach the holiday.
Yeah, sounds great. Also, because we've been sending out these like massive emails, and I feel like people on the one hand are like so appreciative, like look at all the stuff our shul is offering, but also are just taking in way too much digital content these days. Between like work and school and whatever, everything is like online, on screens, and it's too much to take in. So I feel like this is just like a different way to kind of talk through it that might be helpful to people.
Correct. People don't read emails. That's yes, especially now when there's so much going on. So let's talk about one idea which is not unique to our community, but which we've tweaked and are endorsing and encouraging. This is the Seder in 2 parts. The guidelines were sent out in email on Monday, and I know many other congregations have recommended similar ideas. So let's talk a little bit about what that entails and what problems we hope it solves.
Great. So what it entails is there's been a lot of kind of conversation in the world about, can I have a Seder over Zoom? And we feel like that is not maybe an ideal option for all sorts of reasons. But we love the spirit of that idea, which is using the technologies we have for a whole family that are all spread out to have a Pesach experience together. And what this option offers is a way to have a Pesach experience together before Yontiv actually starts. And one of the things that Rav Rimon, who was one of the original people kind of pushing for this idea, one of the things that he wrote so beautifully about it is that actually in the times of the temple, the 14th of Nisan was a holiday, meaning that was the day that you brought your Korban Pesach. And in the temple, when they would bring the Korban Pesach, I talked about this actually a little bit on Shabbat Zachor. It was very... It was like a whole show, and they were singing Hallel over and over again, and they used all these like fancy, beautiful equipment. And then you would like have a barbecue while you're cooking your Korban Pesach afterwards. And it was like this really fun day. And for us, that day is like really stressful as you kosher the rest of your kitchen and put up your brisket and whatever it is, like that day of Erev Pesach can be an incredibly stressful day. But it doesn't necessarily need to be that way, and in the temple times it wasn't. And so this is a way to reclaim the holiday nature of the day by using some of the daytime of Erev Pesach to celebrate Pesach and do part of the Seder with your family that you cannot be with in person.
And just, some of those halachot of Erev Pesach, the original Chag HaPesach of the Bible, endures in halachic literature. The Talmud talks about makom shenahagu, places where they had the custom centuries after the destruction of the temple not to do work on Erev Pesach, which is like crazy. How could you not do work on Erev Pesach? So much you have to get done on Erev Yontif. But there were some places where I guess that this notion, this is a special day, Chag HaPesach, the day of the Paschal sacrifice, endured. This division of the Seder, things that can happen before the holiday formally starts, before candlelighting, versus things that have to happen at night. Investigating that difference, something that I know I've looked into years and years ago in the context of people who were spending Pesach with extended family, who weren't necessarily going to wait until nightfall to begin the Seder as is appropriate and halakhically ideal. And they wanted to know, like, what can we do all together with our family when we sit down at like a civilized time for the Seder to start at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., even though it doesn't get dark until 8 p.m. or whatever. And so that's when I first started looking into some of these halachot. And then this year I saw many, many rabbis sharing these details in the context of do the first parts, the earlier parts that don't have to happen after nightfall, do them with your extended family over a Zoom call. And then at candlelighting, turn off the computers and put them away and light candles and daven Mariv. And then after nightfall, all of the nighttime you can kiddush and the essential telling of the story and all the eating mitzvot of the night should be done. Can be done after dark as is halachically called for.
Yeah, so we wrote up a little guide, and the things that we felt like needed to be done after dark, we kind of specified. So that does not mean the whole Magid as it's written into the Haggadah, but it does mean all, as you mentioned, all of the eating parts and the washing parts and the whatever, and it does mean certain parts of the Magid. So maybe let's say a couple words on just what parts of the Magid we feel like must be recited after nightfall.
Sure. So what are the parts of Magid that should be recited after nightfall?
So there's certain parts of the Magid that are very, very early, and not just that they're taken from early sources, meaning most of the Magid comes from like the Mechilta, like these extremely early midrashic sources, but come actually out of like early discussions about what does it mean? What are the requirements of the Seder night in terms of telling the story of the Exodus? And we have these early debates in the Mishnah and in like early Talmudic rabbis debating, okay, so we have this requirement to start out the story in the negative and end the story with praise. So how do we fulfill that? And what ends up happening in the Haggadah is that all of the opinions expressed get pride of place in the Haggadah. And because we don't know, because that ended up happening, we don't know really who won or like everyone won or something like that. And so we would want to preserve at least kind of the bare bones of those approaches to how to fulfill the core storytelling requirements of the night. And so I think that's kind of what we were going for. And then obviously some other pieces of it, in terms of like Hallel parts of it, and the Hallel before the meal, which is, like when we sing the order of the Seder, we don't sing like Hallel before the meal and Hallel after the meal as like two different parts. But they're both important parts of the Seder. And the Hallel before the meal gets rolled into Magid, really, and it's rolled into the second cup. And that's also a really important part of the Seder, because what's happening there, it's some sources refer to it as Hallel Shel Shir, like this Hallel of song that comes out, you can't tell the story without ending it with singing God's praise. It's just not a possibility.
It's like spontaneous song that is written into the Haggadah, right? At this
exactly,
point,
so spontaneous.
Spontaneously break into song. So that's key as well. Yeah. So the parts that that can happen earlier, though, again, you can kiddush, like the actual kiddush should be after dark, but you can have a l'chaim, some kosher Pesach beverage with your family over Zoom before candlelighting. You can have a karpas, right? Karpas is not a mitzvah per se, so you can have a berei pri adama and snack on some, whatever, celery and salt water with your family over Zoom before nightfall. You can sing all those fun songs at the end, which everyone's always asleep for. Like, I'm actually kind of excited. I think both Echad Miodea, Who Knows One, and Chad Gadya would be really, really, really good for Zoom, because one of the hardest things about Zoom is like it's really hard to sing collectively over Zoom. When we've done these pre-Kabbalat Shabbat or pre-Shabbat Kabbalat Shabbat over Zoom's sessions with the shul, we've had one person, our Baal Tefillah, leading, and then everyone else muted, because when you have more than one person singing at the time on Zoom, it's cacophonous and not harmonious. But with Echad Miodea, you could like assign each member of your family to have a number, and then they could all like sing together, but everyone has their part, so they're singing one at a time. And I think it just might work, and it would be a pretty cool thing. I don't know. I think that'd be really fun, maybe even to record it. I think that'd be a fun thing to have, like a extended family over, thousands of miles apart, all singing Echad Mi Yodea together. So that can certainly happen before nightfall. It's not a mitzvah. It's a wonderful Passover tradition, and it can happen with the whole family together.
Yeah, I mean, and also like there's a certain way in which every family incorporates their own family story into the telling of the Magid. And in some ways that's like I don't know, at least for me, like that feels like the hardest part of being away from family, aside from just the experiential pieces of being together for Yontiv. And so I think that's something that can really happen also. And different families do this in different ways. I have a good friend who every year as part of their Seder, her uncle would like gather all the kids and kind of sit them down and talk about their family's history and escape from the Holocaust and And, not every family does that kind of as explicitly, but I do think that there's an integration of the family story into the Passover story that happens, and that piece of things could certainly also happen in this like pre-Seder Zoom Seder thing.
Totally, and really should, right? I mean, even if it's not part of you, if you haven't done it until now, this would be a great year to, when the family can't be together physically, to have grandparents tell grandchildren about their family history, and siblings talk to one another in that way. I think that's this would be Dafka the year to do something like that if you haven't done so before.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about the Seder companion the shul sent out. That this was like a really, really sweet idea. It's sort of like like our own shul commentary in the Haggadah, written by, like maybe 2 members of the community and some shul alumni who each wrote very brief comments on various parts of the Seder, so that if you're as you're celebrating Pesach without your community and without family, that you can at least feel like the guidance and the insights and the comments that your extended shul family would have offered had they been able to be with you in person. And hopefully after
right, the idea was kind of like who would you would you pop up at this point in the Seder and like have something to say, great, so like share it.
Exactly.
So it's not like I mean there are many like fascinating things that people wrote, but it's also just like like someone shared a joke, someone shared their family tradition, something like that, and it's just like fun and interesting and brings voices into your Seder that otherwise might feel not as cacophonous as you would want it to feel this year.
Exactly, right. That's a good kind of cacophony, and that's a good kind of mixing, right? If everyone has their own traditions and their jokes and their whatever, every year Uncle Bob says the same comment about Dayenu. So okay, so you'll read it instead, so you won't be there.
Yeah, exactly. So we're including that, and all of the Seder to go orders are going to get a copy of the Seder Companion printed in their order. And anyone else who wants it's been emailed out. And you should definitely like print it, and you don't need to prepare in advance other than printing it, obviously. You can just kind of read along. There's headings, and you can just read as you go. I'm very excited about that how nicely that came together.
And we also are sending out a home tefillah guide, which could be printed or just reviewed in advance. It's sort of like, I don't know, like in shul on Yontif, I do a lot of page announcements. Okay, right.
When I was an undergrad, we used to joke that when we were interviewing Orthodox rabbis for JLIC, one of the interview questions should be, without looking at any kind of reference guide, what do you pray on Shabbat Chol HaMoed? It's actually like a relatively complicated. And we always thought like that'll be how we know if someone's worth their salt.
Because it's the regular Shabbat Amidah with an addition for Yom Tov, but it's the Pesach
Yom Tov
with an addition for Shabbat.
Exactly.
Ah, very good. Okay, I would have passed. That's good.
and that's why you were JLIC.
They didn't know how to ask me that question in the interview, but
yeah, that's because they're Princeton students.
Something okay for a different time. Yeah. So that, look, it's even though you do it, you do it every year for many years. It's been a year since we've had Pesach, so you forget. And this is sort of like as a basic, just like which pages and what to do and how to say. You can, again, I think that sort of help people. Somebody asked, several people asked for this help, and it's we're honored to provide it, and we hope it helps your home tefillah over the holiday.
But I have to say, when we were putting it together, it was very weird. Like, oh, there's this piyut called Ka'eli that you sing, right? Okay, like, can you say it at home? Yes. So weird. Who's ever thought about that before?
There's been a huge debate about saying Hallel as part of Mariv, right? There's some synagogues, more Hasidic synagogues in particular, but also some Nusach HaGra synagogues as well, where they say Hallel in shul at the night of Pesach. That's not the minhag of our shul, although it's I don't know why, because we do have a lot of these kind of Rav Soloveitchik, Vilna Gaon minhagim, but not that one for whatever reason, and so we didn't include it in the guide. Meaning we never say it at our shul, but many shuls do, and there's been a big debate that debate is the right word, but a vigorous exchange of Torah ideas about whether or not individuals should say full Hallel. And Rav Hershel Schachter said they should not, that it's only appropriate for tefillah b'tzibor, but a number of others have been various rabbinic listservs that I'm on have been suggesting otherwise. So that's an interesting debate, which again not particularly relevant for our congregation, since it's not our congregation's minhag, so it wasn't part of our guide. But things that are said in shul, like which of them are just like obligations of the day, and which of them are these are like specifically things that are appropriate to say in a shul context only, and not when praying as individuals.
Right. So one of those things is actually tefillat tal, which on a normal year, let's say you were home because you, I don't know, had some kind of normal disease or something, or you missed shul because you were with your kids. And if you missed tefillat tal in synagogue, you just would miss it. Like you just wouldn't do anything because the community had declared that it's time to stop praying for rain in tefillah. And so you would just follow that communal declaration that had happened in shul. But the problem is, and no shul in the United States or in Israel is going to be gathering to say that tefillah this year. So what happens? Which is, I think, I was very taken by this question. So Hershel Schachter wrote that, which is what is recommended in our guide, that everyone in their own homes should, even if you don't throughout the summer say Morid Hatal, everyone in your own home should say Morid Hatal Musaf on the first day of Pesach. That declaration by every Jew in their own homes would kind of fulfill this communal declarative role that's going to be missing.
Yes, that's kind of neat. The other example. So first, I just thinking another reason, even if it's not, whatever. I say Morid Hatal always in the summer, because then in the fall, if you forget to say Moshe Ruach, you're kind of covered because you've sort of already mentioned. So if you know about yourself that you might forget sometimes, if you've been saying Morid Hatal through the summer and you forget Moshe Ruach Geshem, you don't have to repeat the Amidah. So it's just sort of it's a good practice for people who are sometimes forgetful. So that's just my.
It's also minhag hagra, meaning I say it because that was what they taught you.
So I also grew up in I learned to daven in a shul that was it was Lincoln Square Synagogue, which was founded by Rabbi Riskin, who was a student for Soloveitchik, as so similar minhagim I think at these at our these childhood shuls. So I also heard it said by the Balei Tefillah as well, but it was also very useful for me when sometimes I'm forgetful. This idea that everyone saying something individually has the status as though it were said publicly. The other example of that I think is Kiddush HaChodesh. We don't have a Sanhedrin anymore that establishes the calendar. We just have a calendar that's set by I guess we have a fixed calendar. So the new months are just were set once and forever by, I guess, I don't know, Hillel II, whoever it was, who fixed our calendar hundreds of years ago. And yet maybe that, there might be some deviation between that calendar and the actual lunation, it's not, no calendar is 100% accurate, and especially an ancient one cannot be 100% accurate. And the moon's orbit isn't necessarily consistent anyway. We already know, right? It's a little bit, also has some variation, right? So it could be that it's just the fact that every synagogue in the world declares when Rosh Chodesh will be. That might actually be akin to the Sanhedrin declaring the new month. And so that's sort of another example of all of us agreeing on something, which we don't do all that often, but when we do, it has some impact.
Yeah, it's cool. So I wanted to talk a little bit. I've been thinking that this year is a lot of people's Seder bar mitzvah, for lack of a better term, meaning if you've always gone to someone else's Seder. So let's say you always go to your parents' Seder, or you always go to a communal Seder that's led by someone else. This year, you're called upon to lead a Seder for the first time. A lot of people are going to be leading a Seder for the first time tonight. And there's been so much panic and craziness this year that possibly people haven't given so much thought to how they're going to do that. And I thought we could just like share some basic like ideas.
It's a daunting task. There are many mitzvot of the night of Pesach, and I kind of like if only they were a book that sort of laid out, like how to do all the mitzvot of the night of Pesach and the order in which you should do it and how to do it with instructions. Like, wouldn't that be like a really great book to have, right?
Wow. I think you're the first person to come up with that idea.
I am not. Okay. That is the Haggadah. So you have a book. It already exists. And it's actually the most, I think, most widely published Jewish book, right, of all of them in terms of the number of variations and versions and commentaries. But any reliable Haggadah from a source that you trust will tell you this is how you can observe the mitzvot of the day. You start at the beginning, you read what it tells you to do, you lift the plate when it tells you to lift the plate, you take the bitter herbs when it tells you to take the bitter herbs. And that's really, you should, like just trust you and the Haggadah, like you have what it takes. Okay. You know what all you need to know in order to have a fine, a perfectly adequate and even far better than adequate Seder.
Absolutely. Like, and it doesn't require a ton of like Hebrew reading in order to get there, I would say. Like the stage instructions in any Haggadah with English are included on the English side. So just read them. Read the small print, read the big print, and you're going to be totally A-okay. So here's just like some ideas for icing, even in a small Seder, even in a Seder that you're having by yourself. So you'll have some choices about how you do. There's a lot of reading involved in a Seder and singing. So you have some choices about how to navigate those spaces. So I think is it possible? We might have talked about this in the podcast actually last year, but I grew up using what's called a learning niggin for the entire Haggadah, meaning my family, every word of the Haggadah gets chanted out loud together to somewhat boring tune, but it's never just like spoken, and that means that everyone says every word out loud together, which for those of you who were at the communal second Seder last year, maybe you got to experience a little bit, and it was easy to lead because 6 members of my family were there, so we I had backup, but what it also means, like the reason why you have learning niggins, the Haggadah is not the only thing that you could use a learning niggin to, meaning a lot of people, when they're learning by themselves, like if they're opening up a Gemara and learning by themselves, they'll use a learning niggin because it helps it stay in your head. It's a great like memorization tool. I know probably most of the Haggadah by heart because this is how I grew up. So that's one model, would be to like pick a tune, like a boring tune, and just do the whole Haggadah out loud. So that I'm happy to also, if you want, I can send people voice notes of what I grew up with. It's again like not very exciting, but very helpful.
Someone shared online a recording that Rabbi David Lifshitz made, I don't know, like in 40 years ago on Chol HaMoed of his Haggadah Nusach, which is pretty cool to hear.
And there's all different ones. One time I was talking about this with someone and they said they actually took a class at the Bell School of Music, the cantorial school at YU, and half the class was different learning niggins for the Haggadah, which growing up, like I'd never seen another family do what my family did. And apparently it's like really normal, or used to be really normal.
Yeah, definitely. I think like the trend has been more inclusive and everyone reads, but
right. So that's the other way to go, is if you're even just 2 people to switch off reading. And by the way, we should really mention most of the Haggadah can without any question be read in English. And so even if you're like, oh, well, I know how to read Hebrew and the other person maybe is not as comfortable in Hebrew or whatever, or vice versa, like don't, so when it's your turn to read, you read in English. And that's a totally also great way to run your Seder.
Absolutely, yeah. We've had larger Sederim, we've gone around the table for Magid. Everyone reads a paragraph and they can read whatever language they wish, which is not even limited to Hebrew and English.
Right, that's also true.
Yeah. There are many languages, and Kadosh Baruch Hu speaks all of them. So it's
though we learned in Daf Yomi recently that the angels don't.
That's right.
But it's okay. You don't need them.
Yeah. I just, I think some of our hangups about leading a Seder, it's about our image of a certain, like a matriarch, a patriarch, some like family presence from our childhood who defines what the Seder is for us, and their food and their presence at the table. And, for some of us, those people aren't alive anymore. And for almost all of us, those people are not going to be able to be at our tables this year. But like, if we're with other people, we can try to be that presence for the other people in our life, for our children, or for people we live with, and to sort of try to embody the spirit of the holiday as best we can. And even if we're alone, I think we can just try to like, what would your Bubby want you to think of? What would your parents like hope that you took from all of those time with them, that you can sort of bring some moments of inspiration as you do the mitzvah of the Seder, even alone.
Absolutely. And I think the Haggadah honestly models that so beautifully. I mean, the most obvious example is the literal opening the door, welcoming in Elijah. But the Haggadah is full of stories of this person used to say this thing every year. And that's the text of the Haggadah itself. Like we read as our telling of the Exodus the way that Ben Zoma used to talk about the Exodus or whatever it is, and these people are long gone, and yet we're bringing their voices and their Torah into our seders today. And so even people who can't be with us, not because they're in the world to come, but because they're distant, like we can use the Haggadah itself as a model for how to bring them into our seders.
Yeah.
So let's end on a little bit of positivity.
Sure, great.
What are you excited about for this year for your Seder?
I'm really excited about being able to really like just respond to my children's questions and just focus on them at the Seder. Like that's always should be a focus of the Seder, but I think if you host a large meal, that sometimes your kids pay the price for that, and thank God our kids really enjoy. I think usually having the big crowded and long table at Pesach, but I'm also looking forward to at least having the experience of a more intimate family meal.
Yeah, that's nice.
And what about you?
Honestly, I'm very I'm excited for just like a weird Seder. Like there's something funny about when you think about like the seders of Jewish history, like this tremendous stability of what the Seder in my life has looked like. Like, sure, sometimes they're in America, sometimes they're in Israel, occasionally they were in Florida with my grandparents, whatever. But like basically they've all been very similar one to the next. And to be part of a moment where something so historic is going on and crazy is going on in the world that it affects our Seder, like that's almost how it's serious. Like that's how you're living through something that's like truly bananas. And there's something to me that's like, oh, like this is like Jewish tradition has survived this over and over and over again and been shaped by experiences exactly like this, or worse, or way worse than this, many times in the past. And there's something like profoundly Jewish about this like weird Seder we're about to have, that it's going to be just me and Ethan for 2 nights. And there's some, I don't know. It's like weird to like be excited about that, and I don't know what excitement is exactly the right word, but I feel very like connected to my ancestors because of this experience that we're about to have. There's something to me that feels very like comforting in that.
Well, I hope you enjoy. I saw one couple with grown children referring to date night Seder. So I hope you enjoy date night Seder.
It's been a date night 4 weeks.
Yeah, all right. I hope you enjoy, and I hope all of our listeners, I hope you just try to find moments of joy in this very hard time to be celebrating Pesach. It's a hard time for the world. I was just thinking, I don't know when in the history of humanity has everyone been united in this way. I think like half of all human beings are living under some order of restraint right now, some type of distancing by the jurisdictions where they live. It's like we've never had a common enemy that we've had to contend with as human beings, and that's frightening, but also inspiring if we're able to overcome. I think that can be a model for cooperation and solidarity that I hope will do us well long into the future.
Yeah, I mean, so to all of our listeners, Chag Kasher Sameach,
Chag
and,
Kasher Sameach.
and we're wishing you just a beautiful Yontiv. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of The Straw Hat. Thank you, as always, to our producer, Haley Leventhal. We're trying out new technology this week, so thanks to her for even finding it and making this whole thing happen. If you liked what you heard, shoot us a note, a voice note, email. We'd love to hear from you. And if you didn't, then you know that part of the Seder where you like dip your pinky into your wine glass for each of the plagues, so you can take that out of your wine glass as well this week. Thank you so much for listening. Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Have a beautiful Passover.